you can only be a Christian and a Marxist if you, well, there's a couple of ways. One is that you just want to be all things that are good at once, regardless of their internal contradictions. And so that would be one reason. And another reason would be that you don't know anything about Christianity or Marxism. And then the next would be that you're just compartmentalized. You know, like there's this idea that people can't hold two contradictory thoughts in their mind at the same time. Well, that idea was formulated by someone who's never met a human being, because you can hold like 50 contradictory thoughts in your head at the same time, as you know, whenever you argue with someone that you love, because you love them and maybe you even like them, but you also hate them and you wish that you could just crush them right there and then. And so, like, that's a lot of contradictory ideas, and that's probably only like half the contradictory ideas that are running through your mind at the moment. You know, so man, you're so full of contradictions that it's just beyond belief. And the only time, I mean, I know this because I read undergraduate essays. And what's interesting about undergraduate essays is it's so interesting because the undergraduate will make a claim in paragraph 1, and then in paragraph 7 will make the opposite claim, and they won't notice that they're intellectually incommensurate. And, you know, that might happen 30 times in the essay. And the reason that works is because, well, they haven't been called on the paradoxes, but also because they haven't had to live the paradoxes through, because you really only straighten out your thought when you have, like, impulse A and impulse B, and they conflict at the same time, right? And you can either do one or the other, but not both. You know, if it's A today and B tomorrow, well, then you can hold those ideas simultaneously. But if it's A or B right now, then you have to decide, is A more important or is B more important? You have to put them in a hierarchy, and then you have to act them out, and you have to see what happens. And so then you find out if you're full of contradictions, and part of the way that you iron out your contradictions, which is very, very hard to do, is that you go out and you do a whole bunch of things in the world, like Socrates did. You go, you have your adventure in the world, and you put your ideas to the test, and those that work out in a paradoxical or counterproductive manner you dispense with or put lower on the priority list or something like that. And that's how you discover that, you know, you can't hold incommensurate views simultaneously. Carl Jung said that something like, paradoxical views that are not made conscious will be played out in the world as fate. And that's really worth thinking about too. So if you have your, let's call it your typical negative experience, you know, this thing that just seems to just keep happening to you, bad luck, let's call it, it's highly probable that there's a set of ideas that are occupying you, preoccupying you, possessing you, that are driving you in this direction continually, and that you can't or won't work out the contradiction, and as a consequence, you know, maybe you think every woman is your mother, and you haven't noticed that you think that, and that you know, and it is something that people think, because women are, or mothers are women, and it's not a bad initial template, but, you know, you gotta modify it to some degree. And, you know, if that's an unconscious idea that you have, and you continue to play it out, you may run into your continual habitual negative experience with women, and you'll wonder what the hell is wrong with women, but it isn't the women that has the problem, it's you. And you know, if you run into problems with women all the time, then it's highly probable that the problem is you. So, not always, but generally. So let's go into this Marxist and Christian idea here just for a minute. So we'll start with some of the ideas of Marx. Well, Marx believed that people were basically socially constructed so that we were blank slates, and that whatever our nature was given to us essentially by our surroundings, but even more importantly by our social class, right? Because Marx was a theorist of social class and believed that the primary dispute, let's say, the primary motivator of human history, the primary driver of human history, was something like the rich versus the poor, the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat, and that was a consequence of your social upbringing, and that your group identity was paramount. Okay, so there's nothing about that that's vaguely Christian. That's not how the Christian worldview works. It's not how the Judeo-Christian worldview works, because in that worldview, you're fundamentally an individual. Your nature is fundamentally attributable to you by God. You're fundamentally responsible to God, and and history itself is something like the playing out of your relationship to the transcendent. So those things aren't the same. They're not commensurate. You can't believe both of them at the same time. Marxism is a materialistic philosophy. It's predicated on the idea that, essentially, an idea that Dostoevsky criticized in great depth was that if you just made people rich enough, let's say, if you deprived them of their privation, if you equalized their economic status, let's say, that the utopia would come to light upon earth. And, I have a certain amount of sympathy for a viewpoint like that, because, who likes starvation and misery? There's nothing positive to be said about that. But I think Dostoevsky was right, too, in his criticism of Marxism, although he wasn't directly aiming this at Marx, in Notes from Underground, where he noted that, if you gave people what they wanted in terms of, let's say, bread and circuses, if they had, as he said, nothing to do but eat cakes and busy themselves with the continuation of the species,